It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leone, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Irwin, my friend, we're back
Good morning.
again for another riveting conversation.
And Esperanza, gotta say, you're the producer of this episode because you really brought this one, into the forefront here. I mean, this is a storyline that I never really knew. So props to you and thank you for it because it's a good storyline.
And I think we're
About
just going to skim the surface of it
uh,
in a way, right? I mean, there's
we
so much.
there is a lot here, but to give our Hamptons podcast audience the title of this episode, I guess we're going to call it Millicent Rogers and the Port of Missing Men.
I mean, it sort of sounds as if she was like this, I don't know, what do you call it? The Black Widow
Yeah. Well,
from the title alone, but that's not the case. I
No,
mean,
that is, well, it's the shoe fits, but no, it is not. It is no, it
no,
is not. It is not real. It is not
it's a
really the case, but
fascinating individual, fascinating story.
exactly. We have a couple of really good sources from this. A July edition of Avenue magazine. It's a great article written by an Ambrose McGaffney, and
Yeah,
I,
from
I
just
actually, yeah,
by what, 4 years ago,
yeah,
not too
exactly 4 years
old.
ago. So, Esperanza, I even like the title of this. Her opening line or his opening line, I'm not sure, but anyway, there was nothing standard about this Standard Oil heiress,
Yes, it's how true.
or her family's fabulously disreputable house in North Sea. So we're going back to North Sea, Southampton. Hello, Charlie Tupper. Who
Yes.
was a big part of a prior episode about, this area. But so, Esperanza, I guess we really have to start, before we get into Millicent proper. I mean,
She was not very proper.
we have,
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
that
No
that was,
disrespect.
oh my, wow, that was
I am in awe of a woman who in this time lived the way, did all she
yeah,
did. There you go. All right.
absolutely. But again, it was apparently Esperanza, it was
It,
genetic
it
to a
was
large point.
hereditary.
It was
Yes.
completely hereditary because his scandalous ancestors go Colonel Henry Huddleston Rogers II. By
I
the way,
mean,
that sound
that,
yeah,
yeah, you say it.
yeah, that sounds like a guy from Southampton in the early part of the 20th century. Okay.
Exactly.
Uh, you know, uh, he would have been enough, but he did have a daughter, and that who is Millicent Rogers. But just to give a little background on the story, and I think our audience will see where we're going. This is going to sort of take in a lot of issues here. It's going to take in the property that they had in Southampton, which in its heyday amassed Esperanza 2,000 acres.
Yeah.
Biggest property on Long Island. This is early 20th century. Biggest property on Long Island at the time, in an era of the Gold Coast estates and everything else, where the robber barons, all of these people had enormous estates
There's
on enormous
swaths. Yeah,
lands.
swaths of
Yeah,
land. Yeah.
yeah. So yet this one was the largest of its time, and apparently Rogers, Henry, uh, amassed an
The
estimated
second,
the second.
or are we talking about the first?
I know we're
Because
talking about the second. Yeah,
okay.
we are talking about the second. I mean, he amassed $100 million fortune,
So
and
this was the first because he was
this was the first. This was Henry. Right. This was right. This was Rogers Senior, also known as Hellhound, for his. Let me see if I can get this one. Rapacious ways.
okay. Yeah, you had to say it that way.
It
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
which was meant as a compliment, and I'm going to
And
go.
and rapacious, I mean, think about it. We're talking Standard Oil. Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
It's
right.
not
I mean,
only maybe his disposition in his personal relationships, but in the work environment.
I would say, I actually looked up in the dictionary before we aired, like, what's a good definition of rapacious, and it was predatory.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Mm.
but again, it was meant as a compliment. Now,
In that time, yeah, exactly. This
right,
was a sign, it was like respect that you would get for being this way. Yeah.
exactly. So,
Ruthless.
right. So young Harry was spoiled by his father's money, and he received this inheritance in 1910. And we'll get to Millicent. Don't worry, she's coming. Received this inheritance, and again, he was described, again, ruthless, a ruthless bully, if you will. But he used some of this money, Esperanza, and I had never heard of this house before. But in 1914, he used some of the money to build Black Point, the family's estate in Southampton, also known as the Beach House,
Right.
adding a hunting lodge in nearby North Sea in the 1920s. And
Which
Esperanza,
is the one we're going to be focusing
that
on,
that is
the
correct.
hunting lodge. Yeah.
And commissioned John Russell Pope.
No less.
Right. And Esperanza, you and I touched on this when before we went on air. Again, how history repeats itself with isolated Eastern Long Island in the early part of the 20th century. Yet it was McKean, Mead, and White designing
Yeah, the
houses.
Starkitects. Yeah.
Yeah, the Starkitects, very good. The landscape, the landscape architects, the Olmsteds.
Hmm.
These were people, and John Russell Pope was right there with them, if not even more so.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, responsible for the National Gallery of Art, two wings of the Met in New York, the sculpture wing at the Tate, the Elgin Marble wing at the British Museum. I mean, he was all that.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, yeah, civic, like really kind of civic buildings or
yes,
public buildings, very important public buildings, obviously. And
yeah,
here they have him designing the family hunting lodge.
exactly. And again, it was according to this little piece I found. After his daughter died in 1930, I think he got more involved in public spaces. Maybe for whatever reason, that's more for the
Ah,
greater good than working for somebody
pri
like this. But
private investment.
yeah,
Well, it's kind of the same money.
mhm. That's also true. That's also true. So, but getting back to what we were saying before, Esperanza, how at the time the Sag Harbor Express reported that this estate encompassed 2,000 acres on both sides of the pond. I think they're talking about Scallop Pond, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken,
yes. Mhm.
um, to make it the largest privately owned estate.
And just to rectify, the Sag Harbor Express didn't report this at the time. This was the Sag Harbor Express reporting this more recently, I think.
Right. Yes. Thank
Yeah,
you. Yes. Thank you. Always the
just to
voice
make
of
sure.
reason, cleaning up my messes, and I do appreciate it. So thank you. That is the Our
Just don't
Hamptons
want to
podcast.
confuse people in case somebody
uh,
comes up and says, "Well, what? The Sag Harbor
Our
Express didn't
Hamptons
existed?"
podcast audience,
I'm
listen
the
to
fact checker.
Listen to Esperanza because that's exactly the storyline here. Me, I'm talking with misplacing my commas. So anyway, but anyway, the port, by all accounts, the port of missing men, get into why it was called that. Um,
And
it
this is
offered,
we're taking from this article in Avenue,
yeah,
right?
this
Yes.
article is fantastic. And, and again, remember where we are. We're in the early 20th century. It offered the proverbial good time that was had by all.
And let's be clear again, this was, and as you said, we're getting to this, the port of missing men.
Right.
This was the proverbial good time for a certain gender.
That is 1,000% correct. Because again, we're talking about, circa 1920, whatever, in this
The
era,
roaring
the
20s,
roaring 20s,
which gets us into one of those great periods out here and everywhere in the country, Prohibition.
that's right. That's
And
right.
as we've talked about, I think on a couple of episodes of this idea of, well, very wealthy people having having an involvement in that trade of liquor.
We just talked about it on a recent podcast we did about Ocean Castle with Roy Raden. And again, I mean that was circa 1970s, I think, even maybe close to 1980. But yes,
But its history was
yes.
that house, yeah.
And I don't know if there's something in the water in Southampton here, but
Well, there is water. That's the point.
maybe that is it.
Because it was it's a port and it makes it easy to
That
transport.
But people of this, and again, I'm telling you, this is a similar storyline when we spoke about this, about Ocean Castle. People that were obviously already of means were taking a risk engaging in this kind of activity.
Not really, Irwin. Really? I mean, they
And,
needed their champagne. They wanted their drinks. They
yeah,
weren't going to be what law? What's the law? We're above the law.
I know, and there's different kinds of laws for different kinds of people.
And
Yeah,
think about it. That's why I point this out because, and I don't want to get sidetracked, but it's like you think of prohibition and you think gangsters, right?
yeah, right,
But
right.
this was, the well-to-do.
And I know, and I can't help it, Esperanza. I'm such a law-abiding citizen, walking the straight and narrow, and believe me, it's gotten me nowhere.
I'm with you. I am
you know,
with you 100%.
these people. But anyway, I really like this. How there was a rumor going continuing on how the proverbial good time had by all. Duck blinds were installed on the water, wired directly to Wall Street, so the colonel's guests can remain unreachable to their wives, but connected to the trading floor.
Of course. Yeah, you could completely neglect your family,
Yeah.
your wife and family, but you weren't going to neglect your business.
No, no. And again, apparently during Prohibition, major liquor drop-off point conveniently nearby at the end of North Sea Road. And later, this drop-off point would become a notorious, and I quote, cathouse.
Cathouse. Well, yeah,
Okay.
that's
Okay.
gee, we miss those, don't we? No.
It's
To me, nowadays there's a cat house at the end of Town Line Road, and it's a literal cat
a
house
literal
with
cathouse.
cats, feral cats.
I think we know what they were going for here. But anyway, we'll leave that to our audience. But anyway, I guess now we have to introduce how the colonel and his wife, the former Mary Benjamin, in 1902 had a daughter, Mary Millicent Abigail Rogers. Now, Esperanza, you really touched on this when we started this episode, and it's true. Genetics, apparently, she was, and I'm quoting the article here, she would go on to run through three husbands plus Clark Gable.
Yeah, I mean, all before she was like 32 or
Yes,
35, I
right,
mean, it's pretty
right.
amazing.
And then
Yeah.
she didn't live a long life. She was ill as a child, so she really, didn't live long. But so to give you a little background about this, I mean, again, she was a jazz age debutante, dancing with the Prince of Wales, dating some of America's most eligible bachelors. I mean, it seems archaic to sort of talk about, but we have to do it. Um, but in society, Esperanza, being of high society from Queens, New York, like I am, I know a little bit about this. You know, apparently her apparently her parents did have a list of approved suitors.
Of course they did.
They wouldn't let Millicent just date anyone, but
Well, you have to also, you have to keep the money coming in.
that's correct. But Millicent apparently had other plans because in January of 24, 20-year-old Millicent eloped with Ludwig von Salm-Hulstraten.
I love it. I wanted to
that?
hear you say that. I did. I was looking forward to this. Ludwig
Yeah.
von Salm
Yes.
Hulstraten.
Who was a penniless Austrian count, almost twice her age.
Yeah.
Her allowance cut off, this couple danced their way across Europe, performing on stage to keep their pocket full.
I mean, that's my favorite part right there.
Yeah, that's
She she just lived her life. She was like, okay, you're gonna cut me off. I'll
cut me off.
I'll dance. And
Dan-
he was going to go along with it. It's pretty awesome.
I thought your favorite part was me saying that person's name,
Well,
but
that
okay.
too. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. But anyway,
It's right up there.
um, so apparently, however, the colonel, and she was pregnant at the time, by the way, with the count's son, apparently, lured her back with a $300 divorce settlement to the
Three
count.
hundred
A
thousand
serious
dollars.
change in
Three
1925. Okay,
hundred thousand
that's
dollars.
serious money. Um, But Millicent married quickly again, a couple of years later, to the Argentine aristocrat. I'll let Arturo we should really let you of South American heritage say this, but Arturo Peralta Ramos.
Arturo Peralta Ramos.
Much better. Much better. Thank you for that. Now, by the way, I don't know what Millicent seemed to be really worldly. She wasn't apparently interested in American men. Maybe that was,
No,
yeah,
I listen, I don't know. Coming from the family that she came from, I'm sure she was sort of trying to, she was running away from that, clearly.
yeah, apparently
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
So she married this aristocrat. They stayed married 8 years. She had two more sons. So at this point, she had three boys. Apparently, according to this article, Esperanza, she, wasn't all that interested in motherhood. So the three boys were sent to boarding schools in Europe. Now, the colonel, her dad, I guess, died in 35, still, according to this article, incredibly wealthy, despite squandering most of the fortune. That's says a lot right there. Millicent then married husband number three, stockbroker, an American this time, stockbroker Ronald Balcom in Vienna. They lived in Austria, expats, no children. And
And
then
this
gets
is
in.
the eve of World War II, which is
That's
interesting.
correct.
And they're in Austria, which is wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And again, we're not going to delve too deep into this section. There wasn't much on it, but she became aware, of the Jews in Eastern Europe living under the Nazi regime. She started helping friends escape, bribing Swiss border guards for safe passage of friends. So,
It's incredible.
I
Like the
mean,
fact that she did this is
so she did have an altruistic spirit to her.
I
with
see
all
it
through all of
throughout.
this,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
should really be be mentioned. I
Be
mean,
highlighted. Yeah.
that was dangerous work to be doing in the late 1930s, even as a very wealthy, American expat, but she did it nonetheless. So there's something to be said for that. She did return to the States, moved to, and we'll be getting back to Southampton, don't worry. Started living in a huge estate in Virginia. Again, began a series
Oh,
of
and by the way,
affairs.
her marriage had ended already,
That is
right?
correct.
So
She was
with
she
the
was
Mr. Balcom.
three up, three down, as they say. It's a baseball analogy, but three up, three down. She was done with that.
She was
She
done
did,
with marriage, this
yeah,
clearly.
but not done with men.
Men, no, no.
Notable, yeah, paramours. The writers Ian Fleming, James Bond fame, Roald Dahl. Even got involved with the Undersecretary of the Navy, and then in the 40s, went to Hollywood. Clark Gable was her. Apparently, there was something going on there, but it went nowhere. She left California. Again, and again, we're not, it's not that we're a high society podcast, but we are gonna bring this back into Southampton shortly. But
Right. But I mean, this woman didn't sit still.
no, no, and didn't live a long life, which we'll
Well,
soon
she lived
share
a
with
full
everybody.
life, that's for
A full
sure.
life for sure, but she was, one of these on the best dressed list, regularly featured in Vogue and Harper's. I mean, her gowns were presented to the Brooklyn Museum's costume collection.
In 1949. I mean, it wasn't like it happened 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I mean,
in her time, she was, very much admired as a trendsetter, a stylish individual. Yeah.
absolutely true. And we're going to get to the end of her life now because remember, she apparently had a childhood disease and
Yeah, rheumatic fever,
right,
which
which is probably something that doesn't exist much today, but back then it did. And she died in 1953. She was living in New Mexico at the time, only 50. But here's where we start going back to Southampton. She left the port of missing men to her eldest son, Peter. And
Right.
today it's owned by
The
his,
count's her son with the count.
her son was a count
Her
and
son
his,
with is a
and,
count, yes. Or was.
and his widow, the Countess Willa von Salm Hoogstraten.
Don't hurt yourself, Irwin.
I won't. That did really, it wasn't easy to say. Plus it was the second time, not as entertaining. But the house still exists. And that's
Yes,
what
it
we're really,
does.
well, that's where we're really going to start to go now. And, you know, this is an article from just a couple of years ago. She still makes it available for fundraising events. And
Yes, yes. In fact, I mean, this is, it's very close. The Southampton History Museum, of course, this
right,
property is in Southampton, but the Southampton History Museum has a close relationship with the Countess, and they have had some great events there, which involve, I mean, and I've done this with the Southampton History Museum. It's
right,
great fun, paranormal
right.
activity.
Exactly. Exactly. And we're going to touch exactly on that. Um, Oliver Peterson wrote an article for Dan's a couple of years ago in October of 22, and he describes how, which we already said, it's the one of the last surviving Gilded Age mansions. But here's where it gets really interesting, Esperanza. The interior has remained virtually unchanged since the 20s,
Yeah, yeah.
which is really, extraordinary. And, we got into what the house was all about. He also touches on the duck blinds and everything else and how he left all of this money, to his children. And we should get into really describing a little bit where this is. It's situated near Conscience Point at the time, again, more than 2,000 acres, although diminished. We're using the word diminished. It's still 600 acres, which is, I mean, Esperanza, 600 Southampton acres in 2024, 2025. Yeah, I mean,
It's nothing to sneeze at, that's for sure. Yeah.
no, nothing to sneeze at. So, but getting to your paranormal conversation, they actually had an event. We're just going to touch on it briefly because you brought that up and it's really a cool story. So in 2022, they did have an event, a cocktail party, um, where the Long Island paranormal investigators, this apparently is a thing,
Oh, it is.
you
No,
know,
I'm telling you,
yeah,
I've seen them in action. In fact,
right. I mean, so
we
they,
had we contacted.
yeah, so they actually led a ghost hunt for guests at the port of missing men, which is said to be quite haunted. And apparently they remember this is just 2022. They
Yeah,
had technology here. They were bringing in electronic devices, recording equipment to measure.
I really highly recommend these experiences, Erwin. They're a lot of fun.
Now, so you've firsthand done this experience,
Not
not here,
at the
but you've
Port of
done
Missing Men,
these.
but yes, at the Southampton History Museum. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
So,
great fun. It's great fun. But the fact is that the Countess, who is, more commonly known as Willie
right.
Salm,
Yes.
um, says all my guests have seen a ghost in there.
Right.
Referring to, and this is something that you and I were, touched on earlier, before we got onto the recording, Irwin, that there's an original 17th century wing that is a part of this house that was, then,
Right.
designed by John Russell Pope. But she says there are ghosts.
I mean, in really just an incredible story. And we're almost going to be on the brink of wrapping this up. But like you said, all the guests have seen a ghost here, and but as far as it's the
And it's not
interesting,
Millicent's ghost. Let
no,
me, focus on that, because we kind of strayed and now we're talking about the house, but it's just such a history filled topic, Millicent, the robber
yes,
baron,
right.
the prohibition, the duck, I mean, not the duck, the hunting
The
lodge
hunting lodge
aspect,
again,
the countless acres.
and again, something we've touched on, very repetitive storylines,
Mm.
on our Hamptons podcast over the past 5+ seasons of doing these hunting lodges. That was Arthur Benson creating the Seven Sisters, where actually it was a
Exactly.
hunting lodge,
Yep. Yep.
and there have been others. So this is what these things were. But
Well, yeah, and I think this is something that we also were talking about, Irwin, that these hunting grounds that the wealthy were creating, and it did happen all across Long Island, I'm sure across the country, have, you know, have concentrated a lot of land in private hands, but then fortunately, for the most part, that private land has often ended up being public land
right,
and preserved because it was never developed for houses or in any other way. So there's like an upside to this
right,
of having all this land concentrated in private hands, because um, into even to very recently, or in the history of this area that we're talking about in North Sea, there are people, landowners, who have donated conservation easements
that's
and
right.
so forth. So it's really important to emphasize that part as well, because in a way, thanks to this kind of story, we have some wonderfully preserved lands here.
Very, very true. But and as we start to wrap up, it almost a good place to start thinking is, okay, that was then, but now we're in present day. 600 acres. 600 off the radar acres. This is not a parcel that you really hear a lot about,
Well, you don't
Esperanza.
really drive by it every day.
Right.
I mean,
I
it's,
think that's a big part of it. It's also, in North Sea. We're not talking
yeah,
about,
you might see
so
it from the water where it has this
right,
amazing structure built into the bluff.
right. But what I guess the hope is that it stays in private hands like this because,
I mean, what's the future? Otherwise, it what becomes a museum? Isn't that what we always talk about, right?
right, but, or is it possible something like this could become subdivided if this property was sold off and I mean, like we don't know what this, I don't know much about this property, but it's just
Or
600 acres is 600 acres.
absolutely. Well, so far they've managed to hang on to it, and that's and there are young descendants in this family, and hopefully it will continue, will endure as preserved in the way it has been to date.
And if they do have another paranormal experience there, I'm
We're
in.
going.
We are go, we will, and we are go, I really have to experience that, especially within a building, within a home that hasn't changed much in 100 years.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
interior. I mean, that must be really, thank you so much for really bringing this story up. I mean, she's fascinating.
She's fascinating. And it makes me wonder, really, because this was her father's domain, how
Right.
much time she even how she was connected to the place, probably more to the Southampton estate than she was to this,
Correct,
right?
and very true, and not to mention she was gallivanting across Europe
Right. In her
and
50 years
also
of life, yeah.
and in her later years was in really
In
spending
New
time in
Mexico.
Virginia and New
Right.
Mexico. So,
Right. Right.
I'm not sure, to your point, it's a good one. We're not exactly sure how much time Millicent actually spent in Southampton, but it was obviously part of her life. And, the legacy just continues. And really, so many divergent storylines converging here. I mean,
Yes, yeah. And
really,
I would encourage listeners to look her up, because really just she alone is worthy of research and just a little study, because she did some amazing things, and has a museum actually in Taos, right?
that's correct. Yeah.
Taos. Yeah.
And you can, it's millicent.rogers.org. You can even get more information about her. It's a small website, but there is some really more detail there. But
Yeah. Yeah.
Esperanza, this was a lot of fun. I mean, really, I mean, that was a little bit and different. And again, I I always go back to this, Esperanza. One of the most rewarding things about doing these is this story is off radar. This property is off radar, to a large extent. And it's fun to learn about it and really share it with our audience. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Always, I think it's piquing interest, right? And
Yes.
so thank you for, taking that bait and running with it.
Yeah, that way you're an excellent fly fisher woman because I took that bait. I took that bait instantly. So, but thanks, Esperanza. Always a
All right.
pleasure.
Yes, Irwin. Till next time.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.